On January 10th, 1901, at approximately 10:30 a.m. on a windy winter morning in the little sawmill town of Beaumont, Texas, an event occurred that would change the course of history. A wildcat oil well on a low hill just south of town blew in with an ear-shattering roar, shooting a column of greenish-black crude oil nearly 200 feet into the sky. The well, called the Lucas Gusher after Captain Anthony Francis Lucas, the Austrian mining engineer who brought it in, flowed an unprecedented 100,000 barrels a day for 9 days until its crew capped it. It was the first gusher on the North American continent. Hundreds of new wells were soon brought in on the hill, and the field became known as Spindletop. Word of the gusher spread around the world. Overnight, Beaumont became a boom town. Oil men, sightseers, speculators, and promoters of every kind rushed into town to make their fortunes. Every incoming train brought new throngs, even people standing crowded together on flat cars. Hotels and private rooms overflowed. New oil companies were formed every hour. Millions of dollars were made in 1 minute and lost in the next. In months, the town's population jumped from 9,000 to over 50,000. The names of Anthony Lucas, the man who brought in the gusher, and Patillo Higgins, the Beaumont man who had originally prophesied oil under Spindletop Hill, have become the stars of the Spindletop drama. Less well known is the supporting cast, the ordinary people of Spindletop. Oilfield work was a difficult, dangerous business. Even after the Spindletop field was established, life was still hard. Wildcatters, boll weevils, roughnecks, they came by the hundreds and thousands to the Spindletop field and to fields that followed. They drilled the wells, worked on the rigs, wrestled with the primitive cantankerous equipment, fought flash fires, survived injury and illness, and invented solutions to problems no one had encountered before. Some came to work in the boom town, at the drugstores, livery stables, boarding houses, and saloons. Some came to minister to the sick and injured, and some came to bury them. Many brought their families. The women cooked for their boarders and minded stores and children in the shadows of derricks or under the greasy black spray of gushers. All waited, hoped, and prayed for a show of oil or for a husband or father to come safely home. Whether their roles were large or small, these individuals embody the essence of the American work ethic. With their imagination, their energy, their willingness to do their jobs, no matter how difficult, arduous, or dangerous, they brought the eye of the world to bear on Texas, and they changed the world forever. Here, in their words, are their stories. Brothers Al, Kurt, and Jim Hamel worked together in the drilling firm of Hamel Brothers of Corsicana, Texas. The Hamels had made their reputation in the Corsicana oil field for being the best drillers in the state. If they didn't know how to do something, they invented a way to do it. There had already been 4 attempts to drill on Spindletop Hill, 3 by Patillo Higgins and 1 by Lucas, but each attempt had failed because of the treacherous quicksands that lay beneath the surface of the hill. John Gailey, one of the financial backers of the Lucas well, knew the Hamels from their days in Corsicana and hired them. The youngest of the Hamel brothers, Al, served as contractor or boss of the drilling operation. He hit his first problem when he stepped off the train in Beaumont in the fall of 1900. A railroad gondola full of pipe for the well was sitting on a spur line near the hill, waiting to be unloaded, and Lucas was at his wits' end. He couldn't find anyone to do the job quickly and cheaply enough. Al climbed onto the car, took off his coat, wrestled down 2 pieces of pipe, and made a ramp by leaning them against the car. Then he rolled all the rest of the pipe down the ramp and off the car in a little more than an hour.
A carload of pipe was in there, but Captain Lucas couldn't get it unloaded. And I come up on the darn car and unloaded the whole carload of pipe. That surprised the captain very much. Well, it's been a mystery to me ever since how I ever got that joint of 10-inch pipe out of that darn car. But it was pretty heavy.
Al's brother Kurt and a third man, Peck Bird, soon joined them in Beaumont, along with a man who was supposed to know how to build the derrick, but didn't really know any more than they did. So they improvised.
Neither of us had ever built a derrick, We knew how big the base of a derrick was, and we knew how big the top was supposed to be, so we laid it right out on the ground. A pattern, just like a woman patterned an apron. And we laid our base down and put up our first girth. Then we sawed timber for the next section, and so on until we reached the top.
And when we got it up, it was a mighty good-looking job.
They encountered problems at every depth, the worst caused by the layers of quicksand that constantly plugged up the hole. But the Hamels had a job to do. It was all in a day's work.
If you'd need a tool, well, you'd think about it. You'd rig it up and you'd go to the machine shop and you'd have it made. Never think anything about patenting it. Can't find a tool that you think will just fit, well, you just have to go and make it. They just developed as necessity demanded.
We had never drilled in loose sand prior to that time. We had to get our own experience and fight the sand the best way we could. We were determined to make this hole to 1,200 feet, as that was our contract.
They kept drilling through layer after layer of quicksand, pulling one bit after another, trying various sizes of pipe, inventing new solutions. At one point, they literally drove the pipe into the ground by repeated blows from a homemade drive block. It was a man-killing job, but they did it.
We had no hours. We worked from as early as we could to as late as we could. Sometimes we were on all night. One man would go in and sleep, and the other one would come back and watch, and keep the boiler hot, and the pump going, and the water circulating through the hole.
Their efforts were rewarded on the chilly morning of January 10th, 1901, when the well blew in at just over 1,000 feet. Al Hamel and Peck Bird were on the derrick floor, and Kurt was on the platform halfway up in the derrick. The earth began to tremble. There was a hissing, spewing sound, and mud, water, gas, and then a solid stream of oil shot through the top of the derrick nearly 200 feet into the air.
All at once, the well blew in, blew the water and mud out of the hole, and come in a pure de-oil well. I was in the derrick, and I couldn't tell you how I got down, but by this time the pipe was going out at the top of the derrick, and the other men, they had run out of the way, and I ran as hard as I could. I got away from the falling pipe, and no one was hurt.
The well raged unchecked for 9 days because no one knew how to cap a gusher. Finally, John Gailey told the Hamels to try. Al, wearing a slicker suit and goggles, collected his hacksaw, his diamond point files, and his other tools and sat down under the spouting stream of oil, ready to work.
So, as I was the unmarried one, why, I took the responsibility to go in there. And it took me the whole afternoon to sit astraddle that pipe and cut that protector off.
The work was extremely dangerous because the friction from the saw and the files might ignite the oil. J.S. Cullinan, a Corsicana oil man who had come down to Spindletop to see the gusher, told Al's older brother Jim, "Now, Jim, you watch that kid. He's in great danger. If he hits a spark there, why, it'd be impossible for him to get out." But Al succeeded in removing the protector. Afterward, they invented a valve assembly and used a team of horses to pull it over the stream of oil. The force rocked the derrick, but it held together, and the valve assembly worked. On January 19th, the well was shut in. Oil field work presented constant dangers, particularly from fire. The Hamels fought many fires. The first at Spindletop occurred the Sunday after the Lucas gusher came in. Someone dropped a match near the huge pools of waste oil that lay around the gusher, and it burst into instant flame, sending black, oily smoke billowing skyward.
Peck Bird and I was about 100 yards apart at the time the blaze started, and I was the closer. I got to the fire first, and I pulled off my slicker coat, and I went to fighting the fire with this slicker coat. Directly, Peck got there, and he pulled off his slicker coat, and we both fought the fire all we could. We burned our slicker coats up. We then pulled off our jumpers, and we burned them up. And we pulled off our shirts, and we closed that one off.
In spite of the hardships and the dangers, the Hamels worked in the oil fields for the rest of their lives, in later years reminiscing at length about their adventures.
It's a speculative business. Lots of excitement to it. And you get to see various parts of the country from one field to the other. Whenever there's a new field open up, why, we feel we just got to move on to the next boom. Just kind of gets in our blood, I guess.
Willie Henry, a young African-American man living in Beaumont during the autumn of 1900, showed an enterprising spirit. He was described by a contemporary as a pretty fair mule skinner because he'd done all the fancy driving, had the best team. Usually you could tell their ability by the team they drove. On October 27, 1900, Captain Anthony Lucas spudded in, or began drilling, the Lucas Well on Spindletop Hill. Henry was working for the Reverend John Cheney, local rice farmer and part-time preacher, and the Hamels hired him to haul wood for fueling the boiler that powered the steam-driven drilling machinery.
I hauled hardwood, 4-foot cordwood, and pine slabs from the railroad, and also from the sawmill that was in the vicinity of Spindletop. I had to haul these slabs across the pastures where there was no roads, so I always had 4 mules to my wagon. I did this work myself. The wood was unloaded at the steam boiler, which was about 60 feet from the dairy.
When the slush pit became clogged with sand, the Reverend Cheney sent Willie Henry over to help.
Sometime in December, before Christmas, I helped to clean out the slush pits. A fresh snow scraper was used to pull the mud out of the pit until the mules could be put in.
Once they were able to get the mules into the pit, they finished the job in short order.
After the sand and mud had been taken out of this pit, it was plowed up thoroughly. The following day, some 15 head or more of cows were put in and made to keep moving around for 4 or 5 hours. When this mud had been thoroughly trampled with the cattle, we drove them back to their pastures.
They pumped the mud down the well, and the invention worked. The mud stabilized the walls of the hole, and they were able to drill through the quicksand formation. From that time on, drilling mud became an essential part of the drilling process. Caroline Weed Fitzgerald Lucas, called Carrie, was the wife of Anthony Lucas and an influential presence during the drilling of the Lucas Gusher. Lucas proudly referred to his wife as one of Georgia's most fair, accomplished, and highly connected ladies. It must have been especially difficult for Carrie Lucas to move to the flat Gulf Coast plain and live in humidity and mosquitoes near the rough sawmill town of Beaumont, while her husband embarked on what was widely considered to be a lunatic venture. But if she was afraid, or miserable, or lonely, not a single word of protest has survived. The Lucases had first come to Beaumont in the fall of 1899, when Lucas had made the first attempt to drill on Spindletop Hill using his own money. When it failed at 575 feet because of the quicksand, Lucas recalled later,
I had about decided to give up the struggle when my wife took a hand. She insisted that I go on. She urged the risk and the sacrifice. And after listening to her, I went to John Gailey and J.M. Guthrie of Pittsburgh. I explained to them the situation and what I had found in the way of oil, and they consented to join me. My wife said she was happy and would be unhappy if I gave up.
Carrie Lucas was as good as her word. When the Lucas family ran short of money, she sold most of the fine pieces of furniture they had brought with them from Washington, then made makeshift furniture from egg crates and apple boxes, which she covered with calico. According to Kurt Hamel, Carrie intervened when, at 900 feet, the drillers hit a small oil sand they couldn't produce from successfully. She was out on the hill when Gailey, Lucas, and Al Hamel were trying to decide whether to abandon that site or go on drilling. Gailey favored shutting down. Al Hamel quoted Carrie Lucas.
Mr. Gailey, the contract calls for drilling this well to 1,200 feet. I'm not satisfied with this test. I feel that every effort should be made to carry this well down to 1,200 feet. We need to know what is down that far.
There followed some conversation between her, Gailey, Lucas, and Al. Caroline Lucas carried the day. They decided to keep drilling to the full 1,200 feet. They struck oil at just over 1,000 feet, and the Spindletop oil field was born. Captain Lucas later spoke of his wife's loyalty and support in an interview with the Beaumont Enterprise.
I drilled and drilled week after week with no result, and I am frank to confess that I was becoming discouraged with the work. Things were looking awful blue to me. I was on the point of giving up when my wife stamped down her foot and would not allow any such action. She stood by me day after day and encouraged me in my work. The month passed, and I was beginning to despair more and more. I fancied I was wrong in all my geological calculations after all. But my wife was always on hand to cheer me up or make me ashamed of myself for wanting to quit. I continued to drill until the gusher started to emit immense volumes of oil. The well was only a mile from our home and in plain view. There my wife stood in the door, watching the display, and it was a heap of satisfaction to see her there. She soon came hurrying over to the gusher, and the look of joy which illuminated her countenance was reward sufficient for all the worry and work I had gone through.
Anthony Lucas couldn't remember just what he did when the well came in, but an hour later, he was where his heart lay.
I was at home with my wife and my boy in my arms, and we were all crying for sheer joy.
The morning after, it was Carrie Lucas who instructed her husband to bring young Al Hamel to their home for a hot breakfast and a few hours' sleep. 50 years later, Al still remembered the kindness. And it was she who first spotted the telltale shooting flames and billowing black smoke that Sunday when the first big fire erupted on Spindletop Hill. The Lucas family was just sitting down to Sunday dinner when she looked out the window and saw the fire. Lucas knew that if it ever reached the well, his worst fears would be realized. They might never be able to put it out. He knelt for a quick prayer, then raced for his horse, which was standing saddled at the front of the house. As he was heading out the door, Carrie called her words of encouragement after him.
You work, Anthony. I'll pray.
Lucas and his men successfully extinguished the fire before it reached the well. When it came to Caroline Lucas, Kurt Hamels spoke for all of them.
She was a fine lady with a lot of determination.
George Parker Stoker was a young doctor who left a successful practice in the eastern United States to come to the Spindletop oil field to make his fortune. He later wrote a book entitled JoeMedico about his experiences at Spindletop and other East Texas boom towns. He stepped off the train in Beaumont on a rainy spring day.
Men in high boots were swinging and cracking long whips over the back of mule teams, wallowing in mud up to their bellies, straining to pull the wagons laden with heavy pipe and other oil well supplies, plunging, falling into the mud, getting up to lunge again as the singing whips tore at their backs. And the raw curses of mule skinners filled the air. A wave of distaste and excitement swept over me as I viewed the scene.
Stoker went to the Crosby House Hotel in Beaumont, which to him looked like an old scow pushed up against the banks of the river. The front porch of the hotel and the surrounding flower beds had been divided into temporary stalls. Maps of oil fields were nailed to makeshift walls or spread out on tops of tables and desks.
Men and women gesticulating wildly ran from one stall to another. Stacks of greenbacks stood out in vivid contrast against the blue of the maps. I had never seen so much money. I stood and watched with amazement as hundreds of thousands of dollars were exchanged for future oil wells in that great Spindletop oil field, Texas' first gusher field.
Looking for a room, Stoker entered the hotel lobby.
Roar of noise burst upon my ears. The high-pitched, strained voices of women mingled with the coarser voices of men. Oaths and curses exploded through a haze of cigarette, cigar, and pipe smoke which hung over the lobby. A milling throng of humanity of every type moved in groups or alone. Well-dressed, prosperous businessmen stood talking to the roughneck in high boots and slicker suit. And disheveled, hard-faced women screamed at each other above the din. The one theme was oil leases.
Stoker found no rooms. Space in the halls was occupied with cots, and even the chairs in the lobby were rented for months in advance. He decided to try his luck at Spindletop Hill. He engaged a hack, or horse-drawn taxi, to take him out to the oil field.
The hacky hit the ribs of the horses a sharp tap, and down the street we galloped. The old hack lurching and listing from side to side as if it were on a stormy sea. And we finally encountered the old shell road, which ran through that flat, dreary-looking, salt-grass-covered land. Soon, the first oil derrick came in sight. And by the time we entered the main part of the Spindletop oil field, we were driving down a lane of derricks.
The driver stopped at one of the hotels on the main street of the shantytown.
I paid him, took my bag, and stepped down. A fountain of mud, oil, and water burst forth to greet my shoes and the bottom of my pants. 2 jumps, and I landed on the boardwalk in front of the larger shack. And from its sign, I knew it was a hotel.
Parker got a room at the hotel, which was actually just a ramshackle building of unpainted 12-inch planks. The furnishings in his tiny room consisted of a half-size, sagging bed, unwashed sheets, and 1 broken chair. But the young doctor found plenty of business. At first, he fought his own disgust.
The brutality, the gross and flagrant bestiality, the crass ignorance of the people, the loss of life through lack of sanitation, indifference, and violence. But the intangible, sinister, and hypnotic wildness dominated all things. And I soon found myself rushing through the days as wildly as the others. I found myself thrilling with excitement as I watched that black gold roar from the earth.
When the Spindletop boom began to die, Parker found to his own dismay that he actually missed the constant action. He left Beaumont for the big thicket boom towns of Sour Lake, Saratoga, and Batson. Scott and G.B. Buttermilk Thomas were the sons of Ryman Thomas, one of the best-known health practitioners at Spindletop. He was not a physician, but a pharmacist who owned a drugstore and ice cream parlor in the middle of Gladys City, one of the settlements out on the hill. Thomas provided medicine and limited medical treatment, eventually earning the nickname of Doc. His sons, Scott and Buttermilk, were born on the hill. They described some of their memories of life there.
Wells would blow out with a terrific roar. People would start running. Later on, roughnecks would come into the drugstore all dirty for soda water. Most of the time, the wells weren't gushers, just blowouts from gas pockets. Sometimes, after the gas blew out, it would turn to oil. The gas was hydrogen sulfide, and it smelled like rotten eggs.
The streets of Gladys City were dusty. They weren't really streets, just trails built at random. The houses were mostly boards covered with tar paper. They were heated by coal. My father's drugstore was a 2-story wooden building with long brass counters and a soda fountain.
Alice Shockley Slauson's father, Captain Jack Shockley, moved his wife and their 8 children to Spindletop Hill about a month after the Lucas Gusher came in. Alice Shockley Slauson witnessed all but the very earliest of the hundreds of gushers that roared in at the field during its 1901 to 1903 heyday. She saw the hill through the eyes of a child, then a teenager. Captain Jack Shockley told his family, "We may not get rich off of any of this oil, but we're going to get money spent by rich people." He operated a livery stable, ferrying people by horse-drawn wagon to the field.
Them poor old horses. I used to feel so sorry for them. Papa used to drive them from the oil field to South Park School, where the trolley car stopped. Every hour there was one, and every hour my daddy was there, coming and going on the hour, by the hour, meeting it because there was people swarming.
Within weeks of the Lucas discovery, a strange ragtag town began to take shape amidst the derricks, stacks of pipe, and boilers on Spindletop Hill.
When we first went out there was hardly anything. There was tents all up everywhere. But they began to squat a little piece of ground and build a little house on it to live out there. That's what we did. It didn't take them long to build up. They had a post office and depot. And then they extended the train from Beaumont and went all the way to Sabine. That was something. It was so crowded on the hill, you couldn't get around. People milling around and sleeping on the ground anywhere they could.
Alice's mother, Polly Ann Shockley, rented the upper story of the family's home to roomers, while the family itself lived downstairs.
Our boarding house was pretty famous, I guess. The upstairs was just one big open room, so Mama put cots up there. She just filled that place up tight as she could with ormy cots. They had to pay maybe, 75 cents, $1, $1.50. They was glad to get it. We fed whirls of people. Oh, wonderful food, good food. My mother and grandmother, they were cooks. We had tables all over the yard, even the back porch. It had a well, we had to pump water out of the ground. We had some benches sitting around with little tin wash basins. When those men would come in at the noon hour to eat, they could go there and wash their hands. They'd take their shoes off if they'd go in the house, 'cause they'd be oily. My mama was a very tidy and clean person. At first, we didn't have nothing but just benches, and take a keg of nails, put it one end, a keg at the other end, lay a board up there. That's where most of the people ate. Oh, it was a madhouse. Of course, we kids, we was having a ball. We liked all that stuff.
Children's lives at Spindletop were a blend of childhood innocence and oilfield reality. Like children anywhere, however, they managed to find ways to have a good time.
We swam in all them pools out there. The snakes took for that high ground when we kids got in there.
Slauson, who had come from a comparatively sheltered life in Houston, reveled in the pandemonium and the freedom of living in the oil field.
Mama couldn't handle us. Oh, boy. Papa would lay the law down every night, and we'd sure break it the next day. We would just look like little wild animals turned loose out there. It wasn't that we did anything destructive or bad or anything. We were just into everything. You couldn't lay a board down there that we didn't go dust it, look at it, and see where we were going to put it, and ask 900 million questions about everything. And we were just that curious,
The oil field was a place where their childish imaginations could run rampant, and their games reflected their surroundings.
We would get as close as we could to them derricks. Boy, we were scared of those boilers. When they'd break down, they'd push them off to the side. You know how big they were. We used to play hide and seek in them things. It's a wonder we didn't smother to death. We played hopscotch, jump rope, climbing ladders, tumbling. We didn't have toys like today. We had the roughest kinds of things to play with. At Christmas time, we'd get a little something unusual. Maybe a doll once in a while, or a little buggy, or a little something. We played with real stuff, honey. I could climb that derrick and sit on that platform faster than any of them men. Of course, Mom would tan my backside when I came home covered with oil.
Did she know Patillo Higgins, the Beaumont man who first believed there was oil under Spindletop Hill?
Not as well as some of them. He just didn't seem to be as sociable as some of the other men were out there. To us kids, anyway.
As the children grew older, there were other amusements. In spite of the danger, violence, and hardship at Spindletop, many families managed to succeed in making a good life for themselves. They created their own sedate entertainment as alternatives to the saloons and gambling halls. They held dances, serving ice cream, soda, and lemonade.
We danced the two-step. We waltzed a lot, too, and did the turkey trot. We made up a lot of our dances as we went along. But, boy, we sure did stomp it and give it a big try. Everybody had a horn, a drum, and a bass fiddle. Most of the people that call themselves decent went home at a decent hour, just like decent people do nowadays. But some of them didn't mind staying just a little bit longer. And they got pretty rough along about daylight.
In spite of the chaos and the accompanying vice on Spindletop Hill, the Shockley family was able to go to church.
We had a Methodist and later on a Baptist church. At first, we had nothing but people in tents. And they were just general preachers, I guess. We went, though, regardless of what they were.
The children were daily witnesses to the extraordinary happenings on the hill.
They'd drill. You never seen so many rocks and so much sand and so much stuff come out of Mother Earth in all the days of your life. We made hills out of it. That was our playground. There was nothing there to play with, but everything looked so big. You could look down a lane where they had nothing but just rows and rows of them boilers,
They learned tragedy early, too.
Oh, we had a terrible thing happen. They had what was called a slush pit. So when they bring all this stuff up out of the earth. It was molten rocks and slush stuff, and it was hot as a firecracker. Well, one day, one of our boarders fell out of that derrick and into that slush pit. It was so hot, it just took all the skin off. My mama run from our house to that derrick with a sheet and a long stick, and she picked up on the way, and she kneeled down and told him to hold on to that stick, and she pulled him out of that slush pit. He didn't have a chance, though. My mama got burned on her arms pretty bad, but it killed him. We found out all about life, honey. Very, very young. Oh, we seen it all.
The sheer volume of oil at Spindletop forced people to devise new uses for it, and from then on, the only limit was human vision. Spindletop gave the world a choice of energy sources and made the state of Texas synonymous with big oil. Alice Lawson put it in her own words.
That gusher surprised the whole world. They called it liquid gold coming up out of the ground, and everybody wanted to come to Texas. That's where Texas got famous.
Al and Kurt Hamel, Willie Henry, Caroline Lucas, George Parker Stoker, Scott and Buttermilk Thomas, Alice Shockley Slauson, and hundreds and thousands more. By simply doing their jobs, these men and women of Spindletop linked dream to reality, and the world became a different place. They deserve their place in history.